On today's edition of Locked On NHL, a very simple question: buy or sell?
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Locked On NHL. I am Nick Zararis, the host of Locked On Oilers. That's my good friend, my co-host, Hunter Hodies, one of the co-hosts of Locked On Penguins. We want to thank everyone who's making Locked On NHL their first listen of the day. Locked On NHL, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, where you can enjoy the NFL season with a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So today's show is going to be very breakneck, very fast. We are going to hit on all 16 teams that are currently in a playoff spot as of 11:48 a.m. on Thursday, November 1st. So without further ado, getting on into this, Hunter and I are going to do our best. We are going to have about a minute 40 per team on this episode, about a minute 38 to be specific. So without further ado, in the Atlantic Division, the Florida Panthers are up first. I am absolutely buying the Florida Panthers as a Stanley Cup contender. They won the Stanley Cup last year. They've lost only a few players. They will almost certainly add at the deadline as well. And all of the bones are here for a very strong team.
Yeah, this team is still very deep, especially at forward. Defensively, they play very strong. They have the goaltender in net. This is very much a Stanley Cup contender, and as you hinted at, I am very sure that Bill Zito is going to add to this team at the deadline, if I had to guess. Probably going to be another forward to kind of supplement the lineup that way. But yes, they are a contender, especially to go back-to-back.
The one last thing I want to get in on Florida, they have the benefit of playing in a really weak division. I mean, we're going to get to Toronto, who's second in the Atlantic right now. But other than Toronto, that division seems pretty light at the top. Toronto, I got to see what's up with Austin Matthews before I can make it too definitive. I'm selling the Leafs as Stanley Cup contenders purely on what we always talk about, Hunter. Until I see it, I'm not going to believe it. And a Leafs team with Joe Woll, who is having a nice season as first time as a real starting goalie. I do not trust Joseph Woll in a playoff series. And the fact that we don't know what's up with Austin Matthews has me to sell.
Yeah, I'm on the fence when it comes to Leafs. They're definitely, obviously good enough to make the playoffs. But until they win a round or two, I'm still going to be skeptical. So I'm on the fence. So if I'm saying that, I'm going to probably sell a bit as well. I need to see it against some of these top teams in the playoffs, man.
Moving along, next up, third in the Atlantic right now and third in the Atlantic in the power rankings are the Tampa Bay Lightning. I am selling the Lightning as Stanley Cup contenders. They're too top heavy. The stars they have are all very talented, but they lack the depth requisite with a long playoff run. You know, Kucherov is still great. Gensel is fitting in very nicely. Vasilevsky is looks significantly more comfortable than he did last season. This is a very talented team, but without additional reinforcements, and I struggle to see how they're going to be able to afford to add anything of note at the deadline. You know, last year it was Matt Dumba was their big trade deadline acquisition. They're a solid team. They'll make the playoffs, but anything more than that, I think, is asking for too much.
I would agree. I'm selling on the Lightning a little bit as well. Andrei Vasilevsky is having a great season. He's well above league average right now. Last year, he struggled a little bit, Nick, but this year he's playing very well. And as long as he's playing at this level, he gives the Lightning a chance in any series that they go up against for any team. But I agree, the Lightning are too top heavy. Their top two lines are very good. They kind of have a little bit of a super line with Jake Gensel, Braden Point, who's back, and Nikita Kucherov. Then you have the Hagel line, which is also good. But that bottom six, I hate saying it, but it's atrocious. It's really bad. And if they want to make some moves at the deadline, which I think they will because I think they're going to make the playoffs, you got to get another forward or two in there that can help out your third line. Because right now, you're getting next to no offense from a lot of your bottom six. All of your offense is coming from those big guns in your top six. And I don't think that's going to be good enough to win in the playoffs. So, yeah, I'm selling on them for a contender.
Looking at those lineups, looking at that lineup and looking at their point totals, once you get past their big four guns, there's not a lot to work with here. Once you get past Gensel, and look, Hagel's having a very solid season. He's at a point per game. That's nothing to sneeze at, but it's a light lineup. And that ultimately is really what becomes the point of delineation, for lack of a better word, in the playoffs. And that's a good way to segue into the first team in the Metro, the Carolina Hurricanes, over here in our power rankings, first in the Metro division right now. They're up a point on the Capitals. Carolina, very much like what we said about the Leafs before. They're a really good regular season team, but until I see them in a conference final, in a cup final, I'm going to be skeptical. You know, they are a deep team, but once you get past their big guns, they don't necessarily have any real oomph. They don't really have any real secondary scoring that's going to put you in an uncomfortable position as an opponent. We have seen them consistently run into teams that are more talented than them and struggle to find ways to close the gap meaningfully between them. You know, the 2 series against the Rangers over the last 3 years, they against the Lightning 2 years ago, they've had opportunities to break through, but this is probably the weakest Hurricanes roster on paper in a long time. I'm sure they're going to add. I'm sure they're going to finish in first or second in this division, but I am very skeptical of their big picture prospects.
Yeah, I'm selling on them at least right now because I still, again, much like the Maple Leafs, I want to see them do this in the playoffs, because when they play teams in the playoffs that have adequate coaching, those coaches are able to adjust to what Carolina does. And then Rod Brindamore is not able to adjust to what the other team is doing because, again, his system is all gas, no brakes. He's going to continue to trot it out there no matter what. And you've seen that time and time again these last few years where, you know, for example, the Rangers this past year, Nick, they were able to really adjust to what Carolina was doing, and it really frustrated the Hurricanes in that series. I like the Hurricanes, especially this season. They're playing better than expected. Marty Necas has been fantastic for them, but I need to see what they can do in a playoff series against a team either in their weight class or above their weight class. You know, it's all fine and dandy. You can beat a team like the Islanders a couple seasons in a row in the first round, but how are you going to do when you face a team like the Rangers, like the Panthers, et cetera, et cetera? So that's the next step for me. And right now I'm a bit skeptical.
Next up in this division, the surprisingly surging Washington Capitals in the standings. In our power rankings, the Capitals are down in 4th, but in the actual standings, they're 2nd. Got to see on the Ovechkin injury. I don't think the Capitals are a cup contender. I would sell on that principle, but I do think they're a playoff team. I think they've shown you enough to believe that they can make the playoffs, maybe even win a round. But more than that, I think is asking a lot for a group that it's a bunch of nice pieces like Dylan Strome, the Protas brother they have, Connor McMichael. They have a nice group, but nothing in that group is special. You know, this is a solid team, but nothing more than that.
They can definitely win a round, maybe too, if they get the right matchup. I have the Capitals as the 4th best team in the conference right now. I would put, obviously, the Rangers over them. I would put the Panthers over them. And I think right now I would put the Hurricanes over them as well. I think if those two teams were to play in the playoffs, it would kind of be a coin flip, but I would lean towards Carolina winning that series. I can also put, you know, New Jersey right up there with Washington as well. I think if those two teams were to play, it would be very close as well. It's funny, I have the Devils more as a cup contender than the Capitals right now, even though the Capitals are 4th, in my opinion, in the conference. But I think New Jersey, once more of the season goes by, they're going to pass Washington in the standings, at least in my opinion. But the Capitals, good enough to make the playoffs, but I need to see it against some of those top tier teams in the playoffs before I really buy them as a contender. But still, really fun team to watch this year.
Very much so. We're going to take our first break of today's edition of Locked On NHL. We are doing a nice job on time for once, which is good. We'll be right back after this quick break. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. If you headed on over to FanDuel or whipped out the app, you could bet on Hunter Steelers, who are taking on the Browns tonight on Thursday Night Football, where the Steelers are 3.5-point favorites, or the game Hunter and I were talking about before we started recording, the Ravens and Lamar Jackson heading to LA to take on the Chargers on Monday Night Football, where the Ravens are 3-point road favorites. Head on over to FanDuel.com, where you can get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends at Gametime. If you guys know me from my time hosting Locked On NHL or Locked On Oilers, you know I like going out to events. Next Wednesday, me and my friends made the tactical decision to avoid running into everyone we went to high school with the night before American Thanksgiving. We will be at Devils Blues. I got the tickets to go to the game from Gametime. And right now, Gametime is having an exclusive zone deal for the NHL Winter Classic event at Wrigley Field. Go to the Gametime app to purchase tickets and get 10% off bleacher seats and 20 to 25% off home plate area seats. My personal favorite thing about Gametime is the seat view, where you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, so you know what you're getting into before you hit that button. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out here on the Thursday edition of Locked On NHL as we are making our way, buying and selling through every single team that is currently in an NHL playoff spot as a Stanley Cup contender. Next up, in the division, it would be the New Jersey Devils, but in our power rankings, it's the New York Rangers. The Rangers, I feel, are right where they were last year, where they're a very good team. Most nights, their high-end talent is going to help them outlast whoever they're playing. If you look at their recent games against the Sharks, against the Kraken in particular, those are perfect examples. They played reasonably well against the Canucks. The Canucks are a very talented team, even though the Canucks are dealing with injuries. No JT Miller. The Rangers are good enough to make some noise in the playoffs, but I feel like the Rangers are the highest evolution in this Pokemon sequence of like of the Leafs, the Hurricanes. Until I see them in a cup final again, I'm going to be skeptical of them coming out of the East because they've been in the cup final twice in 30 years. It's been a while. It's hard to do, but until they do it, I'm going to be skeptical. I am buying them as contenders because I think there's a good chance they're in the conference final again. And by definition, if you're there, you're a cup contender.
Right. I think that's fair. I have them as a Stanley Cup contender as well, but if they were to play the Florida Panthers again in a series, for example, I would take the Panthers, and I expect the Panthers to add even more again at the deadline. I think the Panthers, when you look at their team still right now compared to the Rangers, I think they have a better team that can beat the Rangers in the 7-game series. Obviously, the Rangers have the goalie that can make a difference in Igor Shesterkin, one of the best goaltenders, if not the best goaltender on the planet right now. They have some of the high-end talent, but the big question is, Nick, can that high-end talent perform throughout the playoffs? It feels like they come in spurts in some of these series, but then they kind of turn into ghosts in other portions of the series. You know, that problem has been there for Panarin. The problem's been there for Zibanejad, for example, especially against the Panthers in the conference final. And Zibanejad, he's been able to warm up a little bit as of late. But again, how is he able to perform when the games get even bigger in, for example, a conference final series? Also, the Rangers, they need to defend better. They have some of the worst defensive metrics in the league this season, right down there with the Penguins, which is not where you want to be considering how poor the Penguins are in their own zone. So they got to really clean that up as well. But I'm buying them as a contender. Just don't know if they can still get past the Panthers at this point.
Next up, an interesting team that both you and I are in on, the New Jersey Devils. I am buying the Devils on the prospect that they have a lot of room to grow, that they are still gelling a lot of pieces together who haven't played together before, on the mindset that they're almost certainly going to add another player at the deadline, probably a forward, that they have so much young talent that just has a lot of room and opportunity to grow. And all of that added up with the fact that the East is relatively weak. The bottom half of the Metro is awful. The Devils almost certainly end up in one of the 3 divisional spots. And I think there's a strong chance they could push for the first spot in the entire division, if not the entire East. And that's mostly based on the fact that no one is all of that good. And there are a lot of mediocre and bad teams for the Devils to beat up on. But on paper, this might be the best team in the conference if everyone's healthy and the young guys all take steps. There's a real argument for that.
You took the words right out of my mouth, because when healthy, you can make a real argument that this is the top team in the conference if everyone is gelling. You know, Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier. I mean, Hischier's having a really great year. You know, Hamilton, when healthy, they missed him badly last year. This team from top to bottom, you look at their forward group, it's deep. But again, as long as they stay healthy defensively, I like them there as well. Sheldon Keefe, he's at least coaching better this year compared to Lindy Ruff last year, which is not a high bar, but, Keefe is, I think, at least an average NHL head coach. And again, they got the goalie this past offseason as well. So I'm really high on them for this season. I think they can definitely win the Metropolitan Division. I think they can definitely be one of the top 2 seeds in the East if they're able to go on even more of a run throughout the season. But, they're third right now in the Metro. They're totally fine. It's just, what's the matchup they're going to get in the playoffs? I think if they get the Rangers again, that I think is a total toss-up series, in my opinion, just like it was a couple of years ago. I think New Jersey can beat Carolina in a series. I think the only team that, again, kind of like the Rangers, I know that they would maybe not be able to beat are the Florida Panthers. I think all the other series would at least be kind of coin flips, and that's obviously if the Devils are healthy. So I really think the sky is the limit for this team if they can keep, everyone fully healthy and in the lineup.
All right, last team in the East. They are not that highly rated in our divisional rankings, but being that we voted on these on Monday and there's been 3 spots of volatility in the playoff spots, next up in the playoffs would be the Buffalo Sabres, who are currently the second wild card with 19 standings points. They have the same amount of points as the Islanders and the Bruins, but they hold the tiebreakers. I am selling the Buffalo Sabres and Lindy Ruff as Stanley Cup contenders. I don't need to say anything more than that.
Yeah, I'm selling on them as well. Also, the jury is still out on them. Until they make the playoffs, I'm going to continue to be skeptical about this team. They had a really rough start to the season. They've been able to claw their way back into it. But I think the biggest thing, though, Nick, the Eastern Conference is bad this year. It is not very good. You look at the standings right now. For example, Nick, the Penguins are 1 point out of a playoff spot, and they're 7-10-4 and in 7th in the Metro. This conference right now, you have a couple, or I would say a few good contenders, followed by some playoff teams, and then a whole bunch of mid to flat out bad teams. And I mean, no disrespect to the Sabres, I kind of put them in that, average category. I still got to see what they can do for the rest of the season here, because I still don't think they're going to get into the playoffs. But hey, they at least have a shot considering how bad the conference is this year. But yes, I am selling on them as a contender.
All right, next up, first team in the West. They are first in the Central in our power rankings, the Winnipeg Jets. I am buying the Winnipeg Jets as Stanley Cup contenders, and that might be a bit foolhardy, especially considering what I've said about Carolina, what I've said about the Rangers, what I've said about the Leafs. But again, I don't think anyone is all of that good. And you get in a playoff series against Hellebuck and an elite defense. All Kyle Connor's got to do is score 1. All Scheifele's got to do is score 1. I see the recipe for the Jets here.
Winnipeg, I'm buying on them, but I will say, watch that shooting percentage going into the second half. It is very high right now. I'm not going to say it's a total mirage, but I expect some regression to the mean in the second half, considering the amount of chances that they're finishing to start this season. But I am buying on them. This lineup has been a ton of fun to watch. Defensively, they're playing well. They have the equalizer in net with Connor Hellebuck. For them, though, Nick, in the playoffs, it's about, can they get the right matchup? They were really good last year, too. Everything went right. And then they just got bulldozed by the Avalanche. So they have to get the right matchup in the playoffs. But right now, I am buying on them as a contender. And I do think they're also going to add at the deadline.
We're going to take one more final break on today's show. We're going to make our way through the final 7 teams that are in playoff spots in the Western Conference. So be sure to stick around. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at PrizePicks. With PrizePicks, you can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. Join over 10 million users and sign up today. If you headed on over to the PrizePicks website or open the app, you could do whether George Pickens is going to have more than 58.5 receiving yards, if Russell Wilson is going to throw for more than 187.5 passing yards, if Jameis Winston is going to throw for more than 217.5 passing yards. All of that over on PrizePicks, where if you use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL, you'll get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the PrizePicks app, use code LOCKEDONNHL. They get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out here on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL, where Hunter and I are navigating our way through the 16 teams that are in playoff spots. We have 7 to go. Next up, second in the Central Power Rankings, the Minnesota Wild. I'm selling the Wild as Stanley Cup contenders. I really like I like the bones of their team a lot. You know, Faber, Boldy, Kaprizov is really, really, really strong and really enticing. I didn't mention Eric Sinek, Zuccarello, who hopefully is back in a few weeks. They've got a really nice team, but I am very skeptical of Philip Gustafsson turning back into a pumpkin. I think that's the strongest argument for me.
I like Minnesota. I think they're going to make the playoffs this year, especially if they keep this going. I think Kirill Kaprizov is a freak this season. He's been a freak since he came into the NHL, but he's especially a freak this season. He could very well win the Hart. Faber has been fantastic. They're getting good quality forward depth scoring this year. But I hate saying it. I got to agree because I just get nervous when they go up against some of these potential top teams in a playoff series. For example, Nick, if the playoffs were to start today, they would play the Dallas Stars in a playoff series. And I don't know if they'd be able to beat the Stars with how much forward talent the Stars have, with how they play, how good defensively they are. I would take the Stars in that series, even though the Wild are a bit ahead of them in the standing. So I want to see a little bit more before I crown them as a contender. Right now, I'm selling, but that can easily change a month or two more into the season.
Next up, the aforementioned Dallas Stars, who have 24 standings points. They have a game in hand on Vegas. That's why they're next. They're also third in the Central, so it's nice. The Stars are the Western Conference Hurricanes and Leafs. I want to believe, and I think they can do this. They very well could have beaten the Oilers in the conference final last year. I'm buying the Stars as Stanley Cup contenders. That's my internal bias. I think the Stars are probably the most talented roster in the Western Conference, top to bottom, when everyone's healthy. They have a lot of injuries. Nils Lundkvist left the game last night. Thomas Harley left the game early last night. They are still waiting for Jason Robertson to kind of get going as well. But they have so much talent. It's hard not to believe when you've got Rope, you've got Wyatt Johnston, you've got Miro Heiskanen. There's a really talented team that almost certainly is going to add to. You know, they had the best trade of the deadline last year, getting Tanev for what they got him for.
Yeah, and Heiskanen, he started the season a bit slowly as well. He's been getting back to his game these last couple of weeks, but he had a bit of a slow start to the season. And no, that was never going to last. He's one of the best defensemen in the league. But you know, they're going to get their big guns going, but they're going to get their big guns going for the rest of the season. Top to bottom, when healthy, this is the best lineup of forwards in the league. Defensively, they're very strong in their own end. The biggest question for me, though, can Ottinger be a big difference in a series? We've seen him play at that level before in the playoffs. Last year, he did it at times. Before the Edmonton series, though, you know, he played against Edmonton. It was a bit rough in some of those games. Now, obviously, I know the firepower that the Oilers had in that series and they still have today, but I felt like Ottinger needed to be a bit better in that series for the Stars to advance. I still buy them as a contender. This is still one of the best teams in the conference, and they are going to be a handful once they get to the playoffs. And as you said, I think they're going to add to. So yeah, I'm buying the Stars as well.
Next up in the standings is the Vegas Golden Knights, who have 24 standings points. They are first in the Pacific Division in our host voted power rankings. I'm buying Vegas because Jack Eichel is playing like a lunatic this season. He's having the best season of his NHL career. We know Mark Stone will be back for the first game of the playoffs. We know that Noah Hannafin and Pietrangelo are having a really nice season as a tandem. I think they definitely are a little on the light side as far as depth, but they have the high-end talent to play with anyone. You know, I would put their elite players. They're not on the same tier as Edmonton's guys, but they have more quality guys throughout their lineup that you could make the argument that Vegas is more talented than Edmonton because of the volume of talent they have. I think Vegas is absolutely a Stanley Cup contender.
I agree. I think they're a bit deeper than Edmonton right now, if I had to say, in my opinion. And that you saw that in play, just a couple of seasons ago when Vegas beat Edmonton in that 7-game series. Everyone was picking Edmonton, but I'm like, guys, Vegas can play with Edmonton and they can beat them. And sure enough, Vegas ended up winning that series. Again, I saw so many people saying before the season, Vegas isn't going to be that good. They're kind of maybe going to drop off a little bit. I don't know what people were talking about. This is still a great roster on paper. And you know Vegas, they operate like any aggressive NBA team. They're going to be in on everyone at the trade deadline because they're all in every year. They've been all in ever since they founded that franchise. That's what the owner wants, and he gets what he wants every single season with that front office group, which I think is one of the best front offices in the league. But, this roster, it's great. They have the head coach. They're getting the goaltending. Defensively, they have two number one defensemen still when healthy. This is a very good roster. I am very much buying them as a contender.
After Vegas, surprisingly, in the standings are the Calgary Flames, who are 5th in the Pacific Division in our host-voted power rankings. The Calgary Flames are being sold as Stanley Cup contenders. Come on now, people. I like the season Dustin Wolf is having. He's playing a lot better than I thought he would behind a really poor roster, but this is probably not even a playoff team, let alone a Stanley Cup contender.
Right. They're not a contender. If they keep this up, they may have a chance to sneak in to a playoff spot, but I'm not sure that this will keep up for a full season. I kind of think right now this is a little bit of a mirage, in my opinion, and by the end of the season, they'll probably be out of a playoff spot, but it's at least fun and nice to see some progress being made with the Flames. They're outperforming a lot of people's expectations, including both of ours, but I just don't see that lasting for a full season. So yes, I am selling on the Flames.
Next up, after the Flames, are the Los Angeles Kings, who also have 23 standings points. The Kings are 4th in our host-voted power rankings. I'm selling the Kings as Stanley Cup contenders. Their best players are pretty good. They don't really have enough depth, and it almost feels like someone has to make the playoffs by default in the West, and the Kings are one of those teams that will almost certainly make it by default. The Pacific Division is horrendous.
The Kings are kind of like cockroaches, man. Once you think they're going to go away, another couple just come right back. And, I predicted the Kings to kind of miss the playoffs this year, and I'm probably going to look pretty foolish with that. Their top players, as you said, very good. Kopitar is still, as the kids like to say, very much him. And I think, again, they're good enough to get in, maybe win a round, but I don't see them going deep and competing with some of these other top teams in the conference. I think they have to get the right matchup to be able to do that. But again, I think right now they're ceiling playoff team that can maybe win a round, but I don't think you're going to do more than that. So I'm selling on them as a contender.
Next up in these standings are the Edmonton Oilers, who sit at 10-8-2. They have 22 standings points. I keep going back and forth on if the Oilers are actually good or not. They have a -7 goal differential right now. Arvidsson is hurt. Hyman is hurt. Darnell Nurse is hurt. Draisaitl and McDavid, unless they both have like 3 points each game, they probably lose most nights. They are still struggling to score with any real consistency. Their power play is in the low 20s. Their penalty kill is in the mid 20s. This team has room to improve just based on regression. But if we were sitting here right now, I would not think they are a Stanley Cup contender. But I am saying they're a Stanley Cup contender based on their potential. Similar, I would say, in like a Walmart version of what we said before about the Devils, that their best hockey is still to come and there's room for improvement based on both the talent that's there and just positive regression, because they're shooting about like 1.5 points below league average. And Hyman's going to get going at some point. They might get something out of Jeff Skinner. They might not. That's a different conversation. But I think on paper, you have to give the Oilers the benefit of the doubt in the way we have it to some of these other teams.
Right. Right now, I don't think they're a contender, but I'm looking at the rest of the season when I say that I think they will be a contender, once we get into, I think, December, January, February, because I think they're better than what they've shown so far. And you've seen from in recent years, the Oilers really heat up, right towards the end of the first half of the season into the second half. I would not be surprised in the slightest if you see that again here, because they've gone on so many big winning streaks right around that time. I will say Stuart Skinner needs to be a lot better as a goalie for the Oilers. He has not been very good this year. He needs to at least be average if the Oilers want to do this and make another deep playoff run. Right now, again, they're not a contender right now, but I think for the rest of the season, I'm buying up. They will be a contender, and that the standings, will be evidence of that at the end of this season. And I think their power play is going to get going too.
Last team in a playoff spot as of this moment, the Vancouver Canucks, who are second in our power rankings. I think the Canucks, if they're healthy, are a Stanley Cup contender.
Yes.
But this is one of the most injured teams in the entire league, and relatively consistently as well. I think their defense isn't as good as it was last year. I think I think they miscalculated what they wanted from their defense and the guys they acquired and the size of the guys they have. This is a really talented team. I think Tocchet is a decent coach, but I think they kind of have to be by default based on the amount of talent they have as far as buying them as a cup contender, but it's dicey right now. It's definitely a lot rougher for them than I thought it would be this year.
When healthy, I do think this team is also a contender. What they've shown so far, no, they're not a contender right now. But, if they can get Demko back at some point, that would be massive for the Canucks. And also, JT Miller, he's obviously out for who knows how long. Once he's hopefully able to come back, that's obviously going to change the Canucks' fortunes, I feel like, quite a bit for this season. But they have the talent. It's just everyone coming back, being healthy, and then showcasing it for the rest of the season. I also think, this might be a boomer take, who knows, I do think they missed Nikita Zadorov quite a bit this season. I think he was a great fit for the Canucks at the end of last season. And I don't know. I don't think they would have given him that contract that he got in Boston, but I feel like they at least miss him because he was a really good fit on that team. And also, I don't usually look at this that much. You look at their home and road splits, Nick. They're 3-5-3 at home and 6-1 on the road. They have got to be a much better team at home this
season.
The
Oilers, too. The Oilers have been better on the road than at home as well. It's weird. Certain teams are like that. It shakes out that way for whatever reason. But we did it. We only went a minute and a half over, all things considered. Not too bad to hit 16 teams, a minute 40-ish per team. Not too bad. We want to thank everyone who listened to today's show. Before we get out of here, if you could be so kind, you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell so you get a notification whenever new episodes go out. Hunter and I will talk to you guys next Thursday. We're going to pre-record because next Thursday is American Thanksgiving, and we'll be talking about what we're thankful for in the NHL. See you guys next week.